Okay, so we're live now, and so good evening, colleagues, and a warm welcome to viewers in Guyana and folks here across the diaspora. As is the case, I'm Dr. Terrence Richard Blackman, and I'm the founder of our Guyana Business Journal. And at GBJ, we sort of believe in fostering critical national conversations on issues that really matter to our nation's future. And tonight we're diving into something of paramount importance: our national security. And we're honored to have with us tonight someone with exceptional clarity and expertise on this subject, the Honorable Amanza Walton Desir, a distinguished attorney, a current member of parliament, and she's been a prominent voice advocating for robust national security and strategic policy reform.
Yeah.
And I have to say, her insights aren't just timely; they're essential as we try to navigate these complex challenges facing Guyana. I want to thank you so much for joining us, Amanza, Miss
Thank
Walton
you.
Desir.
Thank you. Amanza
And
is fine. Amanza
Amanza's
is
okay.
fine. Thank you for
Yeah.
having me.
So let me tell you why we're here, right?
Mhm.
This conversation is born out of the tragic and I think urgent necessity. The bombing at the Mobil gas station in Georgetown,
Yeah.
the one that claimed the life of the unfortunately claimed the life of the 6-year-old Soraya Bourne. Uh, I think was a stark reminder of how vulnerable we are.
Yeah.
That I've noted that the government has classified this as a terrorist attack, and I think it demands a kind of focus and proactive national conversation. And I noted today as we came in, and the Stabrook News editorial published today, it posed what I think is a most critical question facing the country.
Yeah.
What exactly is going on, right? So, and I should say, I also initiated this program because I got a few calls from folks. So my home is in North Rheinfeldt in Georgetown, and I got a call from
Mhm.
a few folks who are friends who they essentially asked the same question: what exactly is going on here? They were thinking about how they should structure their movements during the course of the day,
Yeah.
as a result of what's going. So, what I hope is that over the course of the next hour, what we can do is to give some kind of analysis and some comfort to folks around these security threats, and perhaps in a constructive manner highlight some of the systemic gaps in the national security infrastructure, and perhaps some recommendations for the reform that is necessary. And
Yes.
yes, let me start off by doing something. So as I was preparing for today, I was searching through, and I found two things. So one which will mildly embarrass you before you speak, one which will
Ah,
mildly embarrass you, and the other which well, I don't think it's embarrassing. I actually think it's prescient. But I wanted to start with the following.
mhm.
For the Venezuelans, migrants who come here through our ports, they're all registered. The details are taken. However, we have acknowledged that the borders are porous and some people do enter illegally. And to address that, the government has launched the EID program. And what will happen is that we will have cards. That is, this program has already started, has already been rolled out. We have cards for citizens and we have cards for non-citizens. And what we will do is for the persons who are in Guyana illegally, they will be given a grace period in which to come to register and have this EIE card. This card, you will not be able to do anything, perform any access any services, banking without this EID card for non-citizens. And they will be given a grace period. After that grace period is expired and you do not register and have an EID card, you will be taken out of the country and other sanctions will be implemented. That is the policy.
So having said that, I then looked a bit further and I noted this.
We must immediately, Mr. Speaker, immediately establish a mandatory migrant registration system. Mr. Speaker, this system will allow us to effectively monitor the movement of individuals entering our country, to track the duration of their stay, and to ensure that migration, particularly across our porous borders, that they are monitored, Mr. Speaker, and to ensure that the migration is done in a more orderly fashion. Mr. Speaker, it will enable us to prevent illegal entries and track potential threats, including foreign agents and fifth columnists. And you know, when we say this, the PPPC government likes to say that we are invoking fear in the people of Guyana, but no less a person than their national security advisor is on record as expressing the concern that we do not know who we are letting into the country, that there are military men of age in our country, and we have no way of tracking them and no way of knowing their whereabouts. This is not what we have said. This is what their national security advisor has said. Mr. Speaker, further, refugees and migrants must only be granted temporary status until they can return to their homelands with a clear and explicit provision against voting rights. I repeat, with a clear and explicit provision against voting rights. Guyanese citizenship must remain a privilege and not a pathway to manipulation or long-term instability.
Well, it was not intended as a promotional thing, but the point is I observed that you know, all of the issues that somehow have come to play here were anticipated in some very cogent and constructive way. And you know, as I look today, we're reeling from this tragic bombing, you know, explosion that has claimed the life of a 6-year-old child. You know, we can note that, you know, based on some of the eyewitness accounts, this, you know, particularly the gas station attendant had stopped the Venezuelan from disposing the garbage bag in the bin right next to the pumps. And you know, if one, God forbid, had those tanks ignited, you know, a portion of central Georgetown would not be standing. And so in some sense, this was not some minor act of violence. This was a plot that aimed at massive destruction. And so my question to you is, you know, like what are we facing here? What, you know, give us your sense of what's going on. I mean, you're the person who, in some way, when I listened to the clip, I thought you were predicting what has happened here. So, you know, give us some sense from your perspective of what's going on here.
Well,
I mean, not just for you, but also for the people in the diaspora, because some folks are
absolutely. This is something that I've been speaking about, I think, for the last 5 years, since I maybe a year after I entered into the National Assembly, and particularly about the fact that this was allowed, this influx of migrants and the running of our borders. It was allowed as a part of a larger plot by this government to engineer the population and to give Guyanese citizenship to those who are not entitled to it. And I've been at pains to point out that, yes, there are Venezuelans who are returning to Guyana who, on the basis of our law, who are entitled to citizenship by way of descent. Their parents are Guyanese who would have moved to Venezuela in the 80s, the 90s, and are now returning, and by operation of law, they're entitled to citizenship. That's not the category of people that we're talking about. And by and large, the greater percentage of Venezuelans are here for dignity. They're here to work and to repatriate finances, remit finances rather, to their relatives, etc. But there is that percentage in the lot that we have warned for the last 5 years will use this opportunity to come to embed themselves in Guyana as fifth columns, and it has happened. What you're seeing playing out here, Dr. Blackman, is the immaturity of our politics, is that we heed warnings based on who they're coming from and not based on our commitment to this country and to the people of this country. And so when we flag this, coincidentally, it was the same Minister Waldron that called me xenophobic. And so now she is sitting in Home Affairs with this problem in her lap, a problem that has been allowed to fester because they ignored warnings. And I want to be clear that what happened at Regent and King Street is not just, an attack on a gas station. This is an attack on Guyana's sense of safety. When a 6-year-old child can lose her life in what our authorities are now saying is a terrorist act, it shakes us as Guyanese to our core. And so from all indications, this wasn't random violence. This was a signal activity, and the choice of target, the methodology suggests an operation with command and control, and a very coordinated one, and not one that was executed on impulse. And so this is what I have been warning about. And when I spoke in the National Assembly about this deliberate injection of population, and within that population, persons with certain intentions and capabilities. When I spoke about the injection of this population as a tool of hybrid warfare, it was ignored. And so there is this blend of sabotage, of intimidation, and the intent is to psychologically destabilize Guyana without it being declared open war. And so we have some very troubling days ahead.
Can I ask you a little, because when I looked at this thing, the gentleman who, and I say that just because it's the gentleman who went to the gas station, Mr. Piodomo, made no attempt to disguise himself. He looked at the eyewitnesses. He looked at the woman, the attendant, Miss Smith, right in her face before walking away. So I want to push it. So along those lines, I mean, this kind of brazenness suggests like extreme confidence or a belief somehow that consequences wouldn't follow. I mean, what is that telling us?
It is telling us that our capacity is being tested. It is telling us that our response capability, the coordination of our law enforcement agencies is being tested. And I have read with interest a number of theories and positions posited, and you've heard people saying, this is too obvious, something is wrong. The level of impunity suggests that it is intended to lead people to an apparent result. And so there is all of that happening. But what the problem is, Dr. Blackman, the issue is the issue of trust. The issue that we have, the overarching issue, is that, and it's a deeper truth that we have to acknowledge, that no counterterrorism unit or any counterterrorism initiative that we have could be effective where there is a vacuum, and in a vacuum of public trust, it simply will not happen. So when citizens believe that the very systems meant to protect them are now being weaponized or are now being manipulated, a deficit of trust grows. You see the very system being used in the Adriana Young matter to mislead and to deceive. And so, in the back of the mind of every Guyanese is, can we trust these people? And in fact, they've come to the conclusion that they cannot trust them. And so it makes the acceptance of the official reports on this problematic for Guyanese. Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah,
So
because I absolutely do. When I read the thing that says that this the alleged sort of perpetrator of this act was part of some Venezuelan criminal organization, and the device was brought in from Venezuela. The perpetrator entered Guyana illegally via boat somewhere about 8 in the morning on Sunday, and then at 7:15 in the night, that is the same day we have this thing going. I've read the statements of the crime chief saying that the perpetrator is affiliated with this gang, and he's not just supported by Venezuelans but also by Guyanese. And so this raises like some, it's because that's in part that's why I called you.
and you are identifying by describing the scenario the quandary in which we as Guyanese find ourselves, right? Because it is entirely possible, given that this might have been a coordinated effort, that the alleged terrorists could achieve that level of efficiency to be one place at one time and then he's in the city. But you understand the degree of skepticism from Guyanese. And it is that skepticism, that lack of trust, that makes us so vulnerable here. And, when I said that to confront this Venezuelan threat, we're going to have to draw on a spirit of national unity, and that the government would have to understand that it has to do everything in its power to foster that unity. When I stood in Parliament and I said, look, to the degree that you weaponize law enforcement, you use technology as a tool of control of your political opponents and a tool of victimization, what you are in essence doing is weakening yourself by your own actions. And so the actions of the PPP over the years have served to remove the trust, and as a result, we are weaker. So this is why there's no heightened awareness in our population, so that somebody could feel comfortable walking around with something like this. And to hear the National Security Advisor, Jerry Govaya, say that, oh, the young lady didn't tell him not to put it in the bin out of a sense of security, it was simply because the bin was full, is such an admission. What it says is that the government has failed to acknowledge or to anticipate the clear and present danger that we are in. And accordingly, they have done nothing to sensitize Guyanese and to change our posture into one of vigilance and heightened awareness. So we really are in a quandary here. And it is the actions of this government, and I have no qualms about saying this, that has left us in this vulnerable place. You have what might have been a remotely detonated device, right? And so you're understanding that this is a sophisticated operation. When you talk about the fact that it is not the first explosion that has happened, a police station had an explosive device hurled at it. A GPL substation was also targeted. And the government, in the wake of these events, did not even commence a public education and awareness campaign. Instead, what they did is to take the police and law enforcement and activate them as weapons against the people.
Do you think that there's evidence of a coordinated campaign?
I believe this is obviously not a lone wolf operation. It certainly is not. I mean, from what we understand now and from what you just said, there are 9 people in custody, some of whom are Guyanese. One has to wonder, are these Guyanese that are Guyanese who were born and raised here? Or are these legally Guyanese who have assumed or who have obtained Guyanese citizenship, whether by operation of law or by the PPP conferring it on them? Because when the PPP government gutted the Registration of Births and Deaths Act, allowing a Toshao to sign an affidavit to say that John Mark is Guyanese, he was born here, 2 paragraphs, and with that affidavit, John Mark can go to the registrar's office and obtain a late registration of birth. Then one has to wonder, when they say Guyanese are in the ranks, what do you mean exactly?
Yeah, sort of the. Like I said, part of the reason for calling you on this front was because of a number of calls I received from folks in Georgetown about this sense of like, I'm not sure what's going on. Can you kind of, give some, I mean, has there been like forensic analysis comparing the devices in the attacks so that we know, or is it, I mean, I couldn't find anything on that in that regard, online or in the various reports.
Not that we are aware. What I gathered from my own research is that there happened to be an Indian national in the country who was doing some forensic work, and so they were able to draw on that capability. But there has been nothing to suggest that this is a that there was similarity in the devices, etc., from the previous explosions. And you see, what this government does not understand is that in the absence of water, people will drink sand. And to the degree that you as a government refuse or you fail to provide information, as much information as you can, to the public, you are contributing to the problem, because a vulnerable, confused population is a dangerous, dangerous thing to add to this mix. And so one would have expected that there would be daily briefings at a bare minimum on what the developments are. But this government as well is also very quick to try to cover up their missteps. They're not known for saying, look, we missed this, but we're going to get it right. They prefer to lie to the people of Guyana. And so Guyanese do not trust them. And that is what is adding to the confusion and the uncertainty that you referenced. Their refusal as well to engage in any act of bipartisanship, any act of acknowledging that this is a national problem that requires a national response. Also, because you have 3 opposition parties, etc. If you call people in from the opposition and say, look, this is what we know, this is what we are sharing with you, then an Amanza going into an area and saying, look, this is what the authorities know, this is what we're sharing with you, this is what they're sharing with us, and we are sharing it with you. That goes a far way to assuaging fears and concerns. But this government does not understand where to draw the line between triumphalism and what is in the national interest. So, you have a confused population, you have a suspicious population, and you place your population in a position where the pendulum could swing in either direction. It is either they become hypervigilant and almost paranoid, so that now you subject migrants within our country to unnecessary scrutiny and discomfort, or they just completely ignore it, go about their lives, not be vigilant, not be aware, and we are in the same position. So there really is need for a mature, deliberate handling of this matter. The current handling is not adequate, and they will say, "Oh yes, they have suspects in custody." You map the Guyanese population. You ask them, "Are you sure that they have the person?" 90% of the Guyanese will tell you no. They're not sure because they do not trust the word of the police. And so what has happened is that the police have become, they're no longer seen as protectors. They've become political instruments. And so the entire credibility of the national security ecosystem collapses because of the deficit of public trust, Dr. Blackman. And I will come back to it because the government has to understand that it does not matter what technology you have. It does not matter what interagency collaboration you have. If the people, the nation, lacks confidence in the system, it's a non-starter. And so the first investment has to be the rebuilding and the regaining of public trust in our security apparatus and infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've framed it very nicely. I mean, actually, I wanted to respond. So this business about the EID cards and so on, and what's your assessment of how porous these borders really are? What's our real-time capacity to monitor these threats in real time?
Well, I think the minister has come forward to clarify what she meant by the use of the EID. It is a separate issue altogether. What the problem stems from the lack of a migration policy. That is the first thing. There is no policy framework. Out of the policy framework will flow the legal and the organizational arrangements. And so to the degree that there is no policy framework to deal with this migration issue, it is like throwing stuff at a wall and hoping something sticks. That is not how you build a country. That is not how you govern. The EID, which has its own problems, by the way, is not the solution to this problem. You have to employ technology. We have a very porous border with Venezuela. And so there has to be heavy investment in monitoring, whether it's through the use of drone and satellite technology, monitoring that western border. And that is where we have to begin to pay attention. Registering people. When people are found here, they must be sent back and they must come through a legal port of entry where they could be screened, fingerprinted, etc. So there's a whole regime that has to be put in place for us to be able to deal with this, Dr. Blackman. And you know what is amazing? It is that for the first time in our nation's history, we have the capacity in terms of the resources to be able to do it. The problem that you have is that you have a government that is just so discriminatory. And I have no bones about saying this. They prefer political allegiance over competence. So because the competencies lie in people who they're not persuaded are politically loyal to them, we are a casualty. Our safety and security becomes a casualty of their myopia.
That's, I like words. So safety and security as a casualty of myopia is a beautiful line.
Well,
But
I mean, true.
it could be true, and I think you make the argument. I think you make the argument very strongly that this question of public trust and just the broad and inclusionary framework that allows you to drive the broad policy around how we as a broad society will manage migration, rather than seeing migration and the things that flow from it as something to be leveraged for a political gain. I think you make that point very, very, very sharply. Maybe just to pull the lens back, I noted in the review of the investigation, there were cooperation with Interpol and Venezuelan partners and so on. And I know that you're someone who has an international perspective. Could how crucial are these like international partnerships, and what more do you think from, your perspective as a kind of a leader in Guyana society? How might we do more to, so even if you gave advice that was not taken, but then secretly taken, maybe,
I think, look, we're in this time of transnational, I would say transnational hybrid threats, right? And so cross-border coordination is not an afterthought. It cannot be an afterthought. And so our engagement with Interpol, with impacts in CARICOM, and with the RSS, and with other international law enforcement partners, it really has to deepen into a real-time engagement rather than an ad hoc or an as-needed basis. Because, like I said, the transnational nature of what is happening now necessitates that. I think we need to deepen our bilateral frameworks with Suriname, with Brazil. Venezuela, given what is going on now, it could be problematic, but there is need, and particularly maybe in the area of narco trafficking, to deepen those bilateral frameworks and to collaborate with our international partners on matters like cyber defense, etc. So, but again, right? Credibility is our passport, right? And so these international agencies frown to some degree, or to a large degree, on sharing information with law enforcement agencies or bodies that they don't see as credible. For God's sake, we have senior police functionaries being interdicted by being sanctioned by international bodies. So to that degree, credibility has to be built in, because a lack of credibility will limit the degree to which international partners are willing to engage with us. And so the government has to understand that international collaboration, while it is international, it begins at home. And it begins at home with transparency and with the rule of law. With the rule of law. And so, Dr. Blackman, I worry that we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and I do not think that we are seized with a government that's willing to do the hard, necessary work to position Guyana as a credible partner in law enforcement. And, on this migration issue, what has happened and is that the government has, by, I would say, neglect and carelessness, or maybe deliberate, given their political machinations, they have allowed a situation to grow where migrant labor forms about 80% of the labor force of their public infrastructure thrust. And so you have a situation where now, instead of doing it right the first time, you can't. How are you going to now extract and streamline all of that without affecting your public sector infrastructure program this ambitious program that you have unveiled? So they are in a quandary. They are in a quandary because they are transactional, and they're willing to sacrifice our national safety on the altar of political expediency.
No, I think you make a very strong. I mean, but now supposing I ask you, well, let's say in this new parliament that you're a part of, there is a willingness for people to have a conversation across the spectrum of political actors, to think about some significant institutional or structural things that need to be done in the broad national security architecture. What are some of those things that we can expect from the Forward Guyana Party, which Amanza Walton Desir presents?
Well, we have identified very clearly, and you used the correct word. Our greatest weakness is structural; it's not technical. So we lack, in my view, we lack a coherent national security doctrine. Like, what does that look like? What is this unifying framework that aligns military, police, intelligence? What does that look like? Right? And how do our agencies overlap? Do they overlap? How do they interrelate? And how do we professionalize rather than politicize them? So even
professionalize,
yes, and politicize them. So at a structural level, we are deficient, and then you have. So what you should have is a coordinating body, maybe a National Security Council, for example, that reports annually to Parliament on reforms, on threats, and on readiness. Mind you, as I say this, I will caution that there is a security sectoral committee. When I sat in the last Parliament, Mark Phillips, the Prime Minister, who is the chair of that committee, never convened a single meeting of that committee. And so maybe I have to review to some degree my earlier assertion that the problem is structural. It could just be a matter of political will because there is that coordinating mechanism that is available. The Foreign Relations Sectoral Committee in the last Parliament, we met maybe a total of 4 times in 5 years. So what you're seeing is the fact that the chickens are coming home to roost. And so unless we begin to professionalize our law enforcement, where promotions are based on competence, where we return to meritocracy, and where we depoliticize appointments, and where accountability is consistent, every crisis I think we face will simply expose the cracks, Dr. Blackman, that we have failed to address. And so we are very, very vulnerable, very, very vulnerable. The other thing that comes to mind is we have to be more proactive. Our paradigm, our mindset, our approach to national security and safety is reactive.
So what are some of the proactive things that you have in mind?
So I think we need urgently, I would say, a comprehensive modernization plan, and it really should be based on, I think, foresight. It has to be based on coordination, and again, has to be based on legitimacy. People have to trust us. People have to trust these organizations, and you've got to find a way, I believe, to institutionalize risk mapping. These are things that, we fly by the seat of our pants. So when you talk about institutionalized risk mapping, you're accused by the PPPC government of wanting to study a problem to death. But you have to institutionalize risk mapping, and then you have to find a way to integrate human intelligence and other open source intelligence, so that you're able to really detect these challenges, and you're able to detect these hybrid threats that we've been talking about all night. You're able to detect them earlier, and then of course you have to have the legal framework. So if you're going to have laws on cyber crime, it should be to deter against cyber threats, not to be used against your political adversaries because you feel emotionally distressed. And so, somebody says something harsh to a minister and the police come for you, because really being used to deter attacks against our cyber infrastructure. And so, you have to have modern law on terrorism. We saw in this country where no less a person than the Attorney General was quite happy to impose on rioters, protesters, acts, charges of terrorism. And so it's a case of the shepherd boy and the wolf. Now that the real terrorists are operating in our country, what now? How modern is our framework, our legal infrastructure? So Anil has real work to do. He has real work to do, and he must focus on that work instead of petitioning the courts to impose costs on Guyanese who will dare to ask the court questions about their constitutional rights. These guys are so misguided and misaligned. It is amazing. And like I said on another program, they have no problem ruling over rubble as long as they are ruling. And, I'm sorry, I have to be so blunt on your program, Dr. Blackman, but the foundation of everything that this government will do as it relates to national security, the foundation is legitimacy. The foundation is trust. And that's just the reality of it. And the earlier Irfan Ali and his government understand that, and the earlier they get with the program, is the safer Guyanese will be.
No, I think Amanza Walton, you make a very important point about the importance of rebuilding public trust as a kind of prerequisite for fostering, greater community involvement in the national security. And so maybe as we understand that, that's where in your mind, what are some of the steps that you take to harness that community vigilance and cooperation while we prevent the sort of scapegoating of the entire communities?
Yeah.
And like how again, I'm asking you for advice that probably someone will take without saying that you gave them this advice. But maybe that's also to the good of Guyana. How do we start to harness? How do we start to rebuild that trust and to harness?
Well, it begins by, and I think my message to the people of Guyana is very simple. You are not powerless. And so, we have to have what we call a whole of society approach. Every citizen, every sector, every institution has to combine to contribute to national resilience. And so we have to make sure that our citizens understand that they have a role to play. And so their vigilance is important. Forward Guyana put out a see something, say something flyer to actively encourage Guyanese to become more vigilant. We've called for the reestablishment and the strengthening of community policing. We have called for the deployment of public figures into communities, into schools in a bipartisan manner to talk to our children about their security posture. Dr. Blackman, if you go into an ordinary primary school right now and you ask a child, if something happens in the school, what should you do? They cannot tell you. So notions like muster points in case of a matter, how do you respond in cases of emergency? Yes, you may do fire drills for those who do it, but based on what we saw when the maize fire broke out, this is not a part of our psyche. And so there has to be a deliberate building in of vigilance and awareness into our psyche. Look, you conversely, you go to Barbados, for example, and the smallest child could tell you, if a hurricane comes, this is what happens. If a wave comes, this is what we have to do. You go there because it is a reality that they acknowledge and that they have taken steps to mitigate. In Guyana, we behave as if we put on blinders, the problem doesn't exist. So we first got to acknowledge that there's a problem, and then we have to begin to build capacity to, to deal with the problem. So vigilance. And then a very, very important matter, insistence on fairness. And this is where, Dr. Blackman, I want to speak to the people of Guyana, to Guyanese, to understand that when you contribute to the partial implementation or the partial enforcement, or where you sit depends on where you stand, or vice versa, that lack of insistence on fairness is compromising your safety. So if you refuse to normalize corruption, you refuse to normalize bias in law enforcement, Guyanese must understand that that is also defending Guyana. So our paradigm on what national defense is has to change. Strong institutions are a feature of national defense. It is a feature of national resilience. So we've got to begin to talk to our people about these things. I worry that we are too caught up in the latest gossip. We are too caught up in the latest fad and flare, and we are not. And I think as leaders, we have to accept responsibility too, because for a very long time, we have leaders who have gotten away on sensationalism rather than sitting and imparting and enlightening their constituents. So we have a lot of work to do, because if we do not do the work,
I think you've hit the nail along those. Like, actually, what you just said is in some sense the thing that animated my reaching out. I mean, and maybe if you might add, what's the message to the people who are feeling kind of a bit anxious and vulnerable in the wake of these attacks?
I have said that we're going to have to become our brother's keeper. We're going to have to go back to those days where it was a whole of community, and I referenced it earlier, a whole of community approach. We have gotten and we've become so isolated and insular. You ask some of us who our neighbors are, and we don't know. Now, that is certainly understandable in a city of 15 million. But with 300 of us running around the village, how can we not know? Do you see what I'm saying? So we have to begin to be each other's keeper. We have to begin to police our communities. I did not say take the law into your own hands. It's a difference. And we've got to begin to promote community boards, notice boards. The RDCs and the NDCs now have to rethink the entire framework within which they operate, and we now have to begin to build security and resilience features into the RDCs, the Regional Democratic Councils, and the neighborhood councils. So the point that I am making is that there is so much work to be done that if this government takes it seriously, they will not have time for the foolishness that they're engaging in and the victimization and all of that, because they will realize that they need every able-bodied Guyanese man and woman, young adult, to put their shoulders to the wheel to move this country forward. So the reimagining of the entire architecture must now, of the entire infrastructure, has to contemplate security and it has to contemplate resilience.
No, I think you're absolutely right, and I wanted to play just a little in this context. So I saw this. So one of the in my conversation with the colleagues that in some sense precipitated this show, he said, "Boy, you don't understand what's going on here. All those places, you get on Ozama Street." He said, "Man, we have Venezuelans living on Ozama Street. We have Venezuelans living," and his view was one of like, he felt sort of a bit under siege. And one of the comments that popped up here is, I mean, I don't know who Neil Bino is, but I noted this comment. And he said, the Venezuelans in Guyana might be in, and I take this with quotes around it, so I don't take this as, might be 1 million. I might be wrong, but if so, they can form their own party for the next election and win, and maybe we will have sort of Venezuelan leaders, governors. But I say that as a kind of extreme thing, but I think
no. It is not extreme. It is not extreme, and this is why Dr. Blackman, when I traced in the National Assembly the evolution of this problem and the way that PPP's deliberate gutting of our laws, the deliberate interference with our electoral laws, cause us to be vulnerable to our nation being undermined from within. Picture with me people who have been granted Guyanese citizenship who are not entitled to it, forming a group and contesting in local government elections to control an NDC. Let's assume, for example, an NDC in Essequibo. And so you have a group of people who operate in society but are a part of a larger plot to obtain political legitimacy. And I warned that there's something called self-determination. And unless we take strong action, not to chase people out, but to put in place the legal framework to safeguard Guyanese citizenship and to safeguard the participation in our political processes, then Essequibo could be taken from us without one shot being fired. And in such a case, there's no protection to be had from the international community because it's not an act of war. It is not an act of war. It could be done politically. And given the holes in our electoral system, some of which we are, as Forward Guyana movement, attempting to bring to the consciousness of the public through the elections petition that we have filed, these are deep questions. These are existential questions. And there has to be a group of people who will focus on those existential matters. So it's not far-fetched at all, because our NDCs could be taken over, our RDCs could be taken over. We have a situation where, for example, and this is why you see the independence of the judiciary, all of it comes sharply into fore, because we have a judgment that is handed down that if it is taken to a possible conclusion, could see political parties deciding that they're not participating in certain regions and leaving those regions vulnerable. So there's a lot going on here, and I pray that Guyanese begin to understand and to focus on the serious nature of what is happening here and not be distracted by the song and dance and the ribbon cutting, and understand that we could look up and tomorrow we are third and fourth class citizens in our own country. And it does not have to be like that, because there are models to be followed. These problems that we are having, we are not the first to encounter them. They're models where people come, they live, they work, they pay their taxes, but they're never granted citizenship. So the political process, the integrity of the political infrastructure remains intact. There is no possibility of being politically undermined by foreign powers through the injection of population into your country, because you have ring-fenced how you operate. They're models. But you have a government that is careless. The only thing that they care about is enriching themselves, cutting ribbons on public infrastructure projects, and believing that that is the sum total of national development.
It's always an absolute pleasure to have a conversation.
I had a mouthful to say on this. You know, it really.
I think you've been clearly thought about this for a long time, and I think it's important that people have a sense of the views and a perspective on this that comes from someone who's been thinking about it.
And there's no joy. I want to be clear. There's no joy in, oh, I told you so. I get no joy from it. Yeah. The little girl that died, I know personally.
Yeah.
She's a child that has been to my constituency office on a number of occasions. I know her mother. So this is not gloating and saying, oh, well, yes, no. This is an urgent call, a plea to Guyanese, irrespective of your political persuasion, that you have to wake up. You have to wake up and you have to be vigilant. But you also have the burden of not being paranoid to the degree that the hardworking Venezuelans who are simply here for dignity and to support themselves are victimized in the process. You know, I see here finally saying, oh, he will sign the death sentence. What? How is that? How? Yes, it sounds good, I suppose, but how is that a responsible thing to say as a head of state? There's something called due process. And you understand very clearly, Dr. Blackman, when due process is ignored, the society slides and slips into anarchy. And so, yes, while we're hurting and we're angry, as leaders, we still have to understand we can't just be cavalier and swing from one extreme of indifference and even facilitating to quite another. Well, yes, we will hang them. What is that? So we have a lot to do. We have a lot to learn. I regret that I'm not optimistic about the 13th Parliament. I hope that our continued advocacy will see the sectoral committees meeting, because the Foreign Relations Sectoral Committee, the National Security Committee, and all of these committees are very, very important. It is important that the nation sees a bipartisan approach to this matter of our safety and of our security.
Thank you. You know, I mindful of the time. I know it's 9 at your place, and it's now 8 at my place because of
Yes.
the time difference. Yeah. So, I think you've brought some of the clarity that I expected when we called you to discuss some of the, these evolving nature of these threats that we're facing.
Mhm.
I think you've made clear the urgent need to address both the technological and the institutional gaps that you've just
Yeah.
described in our security infrastructure. And I think you've also made very clear the critical importance of the trust deficit
Yeah.
and the need for the sort of proactive reform. And I think you've given us a really clear sense of some of the challenges, but I think a hopeful. So I hope you don't perceive your thoughts as being less than optimistic. From my perspective, it seemed a hopeful but clear-eyed assessment of the challenges.
Yeah.
And so I think you've helped us to genuinely understand what's not just the immediate threat, which I think is the thing that, but certainly the systemic challenges that have allowed these attacks to occur, and and what we might be doing in order to prevent some of future tragedies. And
Yeah.
I want to thank you and many of the people have, you see some of the listeners have noted that perhaps it seems like you're the only one who has this sort of vision.
I'm certainly not the only one. There's always a remnant of people who,
Yeah,
if listened to, we would be
yeah.
better off.
So, so I'll give you the last word on.
No, just thank you, Dr. Blackman, for such as these critically important. And I appreciate the fact that you are very bipartisan in your platform, and I am passionate about informed citizenry. I keep saying that informed citizens make informed decisions. I couldn't help but muse when I saw on the news that Maduro was arming his people with rifles. I'm like, well, my God, we're not even arming our people with information. So there informed citizens make informed decisions, and so very often people say, oh, you're talking too much, it's time for action. But it is important that we speak to our people. It's important that we address the issue of mindset. It is important that we help Guyanese to understand that we have been thrust from a backwater country to front and center. We're no longer backwater. And so our mental, as the Rastafarians will say, has to rise. We have to open our minds. We've got to elevate our mental, as our Rastafarian brothers will say. Otherwise, we're going to be relegated to servants in our country. And as leaders, we have to have a stated position against our people being relegated to third and fourth class in our own country. It must not happen. It must not happen.
Well, I want to thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Always a pleasure.
And we look forward to, hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, coming back and having some broad sense around.
Always happy to come on here. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
All right. You're welcome.
Have a wonderful evening, colleagues, and thank you for joining us. It's been quite active, and we'll try to write something up so that everyone.
Okay. Will do. Bye-bye now.